In the year 1996, a popular cheerleader from a small town disappeared. 2 weeks later, her body was found in a creek bed only 45 minutes away from where she lived. But the events that came after this unveiled a sinister conspiracy involving 3 different suspects. This is the case of Heather Rich. Rivers hide countless secrets in their depths. They conceal the chilling evidence of tragedies and crimes. This is exactly what the residents of a small town witnessed when, on one gloomy day, the waves washed ashore the body of a young teenage girl who literally had no face. Yes, you heard that right. This story took place in the small town of Waraka, located in a remote southern region of Oklahoma. USA, it's a quiet place with a population of about 2,000 people where everyone knows each other. Life here flows smoothly and unhurriedly. In the fall of 1996, one of the homes in Warra was occupied by the Rich family. Gail, the mother, Dwayne, the father, and their 4 children, 3 boys and a girl named Heather, who at the time of these events was a sophomore in high school. Heather was not only an excellent student, but also a cheerleader. She had grown into a true beauty and attracted attention wherever she went. The girl had a kind nature, but was quite adventurous when it came to having fun. At 16, Heather was in her rebellious phase and wanted to try everything in life. On the evening of October 2, 1996, an argument erupted between Heather and her mother about a $300 phone bill the girl had racked up, conversing with her pals. Gail was outraged by her daughter's wastefulness, but Dwayne took the situation more calmly. The trouble was, the family was going through severe financial times. Heather's father, an electrician, had recently been severely injured in a transformer explosion. The man barely survived and required prolonged treatment and skin transplants. He couldn't work, so his wife had to take on an extra job to keep the family solvent. Every dollar counted as pricey surgeries were ahead for the father. The mother tried to explain to Heather that she couldn't afford to pay bills amounting to hundreds of dollars every month and to instill in her daughter respect for money, for elders, and the desire for independence. However, the teenage girl had a hard time accepting these admonitions, which led to a serious quarrel. When tempers cooled, Heather decided to go to bed. She went down to the living room where she wished her father good night. Passing by her mother, the girl demonstratively remained silent, making it clear that she was still offended. On this sad note, all the family members retired to their rooms. The next morning, October 3rd, Gail, as usual, woke the children up for breakfast. But Heather didn't come out for a long time, and her mother attributed it to teenage resentment. The woman was sure that eventually hunger would force her daughter to come downstairs, despite her rebellious mood. But the girl never showed up. When Gail lost patience and went up to Heather's room, she was surprised to find no one there. Cell phones were not so common back then, so Heather didn't have one. The worried parents called all of their daughter's girlfriends, but none of them knew where she might be. Such behavior was completely unlike Heather. She had no mental issues and had never run away from home before. Moreover, the girl always took great care of her appearance and was unlikely to go anywhere for long without a change of clothes and makeup. But all her things were left at home. Gail and Dwayne wasted no time and headed to the sheriff's office in Warra to report their daughter missing. The mother told about yesterday's argument with Heather, during which the woman reproached the girl for the huge phone bill and the stubbornness with which she refused to admit her guilt. The parents felt that their daughter's endless chats with her friends were going beyond reason. And although Dwayne was generally calmer, he supported his wife on this matter. The sheriff tried to reassure the worried parents, assuring them that the girl had probably just run away from home, as teenagers often do, especially after a fight with their parents. But Gail and Dwayne knew this was out of character for their daughter. Heather usually didn't run from problems, but tried to find a compromise, even after conflicts. Unfortunately, this time, the mother's heated reaction and the girl's lack of restraint, who couldn't accept her error, led to an awful circumstance. Despite the parents' concerns, law enforcement officers informed them that most such cases settle themselves. Teenagers who have ran away from home usually come to their senses fast and return to their families. It was quite possible that while Gail and Dwayne were at the sheriff's office, their daughter was already back home. The officers tried to reassure the worried mother and father, assuring them that everything would be fine. They explained that for a girl to be declared missing, at least a day must pass without any contact. Since the specified time had not yet elapsed, The police could not accept the statement and sent the couple home to wait for news from Heather. Disappointed by the attitude of law enforcement, Gail and Dwayne felt that something had happened to their daughter and decided to start their own search in town. First of all, they decided to talk to the girl's closest circle and contacted several of her friends. Among them was 17-year-old Randy Wood, the captain of the school football team, whom Heather had previously dated. Although their romantic relationship quickly ended, the young people remained friends. By the way, it was with Randy that the girl had recently run up a huge phone bill. When the mother of the missing girl called the boy, he said he had no idea about Heather's whereabouts or what could have happened to her. Despite his seemingly convincing tone, Gail felt that Randy was hiding something. He seemed to be repeating a rehearsed story like a robot, and was not at all worried about the disappearance of his ex-girlfriend, which seemed suspicious. However, Randy could not be caught in a lie. So Heather's mother decided to contact another friend of her daughter, another 17-year-old high school student named Josh Bagwell, whom she had recently started dating. When the woman called Josh, his grandmother picked up the phone. She said that the boy was resting after a party and she did want to wake him up. The elderly woman categorically refused to call her grandson to the phone and admitted that she was just cleaning up the trailer in the yard where the school children had been partying the night before. When Gail asked about Heather, the grandmother replied that she hadn't seen the girl. Having received no useful information, the worried parents drove all over the county in search of at least some clues about their daughter's whereabouts. A day passed, but all efforts were in vain, so Gail and Dwayne went to the police station again. This time, law enforcement finally joined the search operation. A week passed, but no valuable information about the missing schoolgirl appeared. Given the time frame, hope of finding the girl alive was fading with each passing day. Later, while examining the outskirts on the border with Texas, police patrols noticed a body in the river floating face down. It was half submerged in the muddy water, but people on the bridge noticed it. The skin of the unknown victim was covered with a thick layer of dirt, as if intentionally to make the body harder to see. When divers managed to pull the gruesome find ashore, something much more terrifying was revealed under the layer of mud. The mutilated victim had numerous traces of buckshot, indicating a point-blank shooting, probably from a shotgun. The face was so disfigured that it seemed impossible to identify the deceased at first glance. A forensic examination was needed. As a result of the investigation, experts established that the victim had been shot 9 times from close range. Once in the back of the head, and 8 times in the back, the body was literally torn to pieces and was in a terrible condition. Since only one person was listed as missing in the area at that time, Heather Rich's parents were called in for identification. They were able to identify their daughter only by the engraved name ring given to the girl by her mother. This dispelled any doubts. It was Heather lying on the morgue table. The identity of the deceased was finally confirmed by dental records as forensic. Experts found non-removable braces in the oral cavity of the mutilated body, which the schoolgirl wore to correct her bite. The news of the young cheerleader's death spread like wildfire through the town and became the main topic of discussion the very next day. Within a few hours, all the local residents knew about the tragedy. Football player Randy Wood also found out about it, for whom the day when it all happened coincided with the annual match, where he had been recognized as the king of the game for several seasons in a row. Usually, after such competitions, loud celebrations were held, but this time there was no room for fun. The boy was shocked by the terrible news about his ex-girlfriend, and later went to the same bridge where the body was found. He stared into the murky waters for a long time, hiding a terrible secret from everyone. In fact, Randy knew much more than he told the parents of the deceased, and soon the investigation led the police to the boy and several of his friends. These events resembled the plot of a terrifying Hollywood horror movie. In the very heart of a small town in Oklahoma, 3 teenagers turned an ordinary evening into a bloody massacre. One of them was from a wealthy family. The second was a star of school football and the team captain, and the third was a novice street hooligan. As soon as the detectives took up the investigation, they first spoke with Heather's parents. By that time, Gail had already managed to call quite a few of her daughter's friends and acquaintances. Her suspicions fell on 2 young men, Heather's ex-boyfriend, 17-year-old Randy Wood, and her current boyfriend, Josh Bagwell, who had arrived from a party and didn't even bother to call. The woman was convinced that the boys were hiding something. It seemed that the high school students were telling the same rehearsed story, with even the wording of sentences coinciding in places. However, they could not give a clear answer to additional questions, which seemed extremely strange. Noticeably nervous, the teenagers were reluctant to make contact, unlike Heather's other friends, who actively joined in her search. Gail intuitively felt that Randy and Josh knew much more than they were saying in their telephone excuses. Talking to classmates and other friends of the deceased, investigators received several leads indicating that Josh and Randy had information about the events of that fateful night when the girl ran away from home. After an argument with her mother, later it turned out that Heather had indeed intended to go to a party to meet her boyfriend, Josh. Despite her parents' ban on leaving the house late in the evening, this did not stop the rebellious schoolgirl. After waiting for Gail and Dwayne to fall asleep, she jumped out the window around 11 p.m. There, those same two suspicious young men, well known in the city and popular among local youth, were supposed to be waiting for her. Josh was considered a rich heir to wealthy parents. He always drove the coolest cars and wore the most stylish clothes, willingly demonstrating his family's wealth. This boy was a typical representative of the golden youth who cared only about his own popularity and money. In contrast, Randy Wood came from a simple family, but thanks to his talent and perseverance in sports, he gained no less fame than his wealthy friend. Friends adored the handsome team captain for his virtuoso play on the field. For his merits, he became the best football player not only in the school, but in the whole city, and even gained popularity among school teams at the state level. Randy and Josh were inseparable and usually spent their weekends driving around in Josh's car on dirt roads. Of course, girls could often be seen in their company. The boys regularly drank alcohol and sometimes smoked marijuana. Due to the lack of entertainment facilities for young people in the town, the teenagers simply had nothing to do, so they improvised as best they could. It is known that Heather Rich often spent time with this company. A friend said that the girl had also tried an alcohol with them, and on the night before her disappearance, she ran away to hang out with the popular boys. This news shocked the parents of the 16-year-old Strata student who had taken such a slippery path. Although the couple was aware of their daughter's propensity for risky experiments, they had no idea that this was happening in the company of young men. As it turned out, 5 days before the disappearance, on September 27, 1996, Heather herself and another girl from the support group were caught in a corner of the stadium. Marijuana and smoking paraphernalia were found on them. It also became known about alcohol consumption. Because of this incident, the schoolgirls were suspended from classes for 3 days. The teachers informed Gail and Dwayne about everything, and they did not hide their indignation, as they never expected their 16-year-old daughter to get involved in such dangerous experiments. Heather admitted that she tried the prohibited substances out of curiosity and promised to stop. However, the parents were more concerned about something else: why a diligent student and athlete had taken this wrong path at all. The young girl's attraction to alcohol and drugs was frightening. Despite their daughter's assurances that she would give up her bad habits, Gail and Dwayne were never able to verify her sincerity. Instead, these harmful passions probably had a direct relation to her death. The detectives decided to talk to Josh and Randy, with whom the murdered schoolgirl was last seen. They hoped to find out the details of the party that preceded Heather's disappearance. The captain of the football team admitted that he and his friend were in a trailer behind Josh S.'s house playing dominoes and drinking all evening. However, both boys denied any contact with Heather that ill-fated evening. Interestingly, the police noticed the same details that had alarmed the mother of the deceased. Both young men told exactly the same story, as if reciting a memorized text, and spoke mechanically like robots. Moreover, they showed practically no emotion, even though it was about the death of their mutual friend. Such behavior convinced law enforcement officers that the teenagers were lying. They suspected that the murder could have happened out of jealousy when the young men could unshare the girl between them. Of course, at that point, the investigators did not yet have strong evidence that would directly link the high school students to the crime. However, the strange behavior of Randy and Josh reinforced the police's doubts about their possible involvement. Both ended up as the main suspects. So, it was necessary to study their biographies, relationships with Heather, and the circumstances of the party that took place on the eve of her disappearance more carefully. The autopsy results provided new food for thought. First of all, attention was drawn to the number of shots, as many as 9. Even police shotguns usually hold 8 rounds in the magazine. Why would someone reload the weapon to fire an additional shot when the victim was obviously already dead? Another interesting detail was the type of ammunition used, the so-called double buckshot. These powerful cartridges have excessive lethal force for executing a 16-year-old girl. Fortunately, such a specific choice by the criminal helped the investigation make its first serious breakthrough. These rare rounds were sold in only one store in the city. After checking the receipts, the police found out that only one person had purchased them shortly before the murder. The seller recognized in the photo the very suspected young man, high school student Josh Bagwell, who had come to the store and bought a whole box that is 20 rounds. According to the store employee, another young man was with Josh, but not his best friend, Randy, but a certain Curtis Gamble, a guy well known to the local police. As it turned out, Curtis was the oldest among those involved in the case. He was already 19, despite his young age. He had already been arrested several times and had spent most of his conscious life in juvenile detention centers. This guy was completely inadequate and had repeatedly come to the attention of law enforcement. He was caught drunk driving, shooting his gun at dogs, horses, or even random passers-by. Therefore, Curtis himself fell under the greatest suspicion. Unlike the other 2 young men, who, although they behaved strangely, had never had problems with the law before and had never been considered aggressive or dangerous. On October 23rd, the police visited the home of the juvenile offender in a neighboring town where he lived. But even more important was the fact that just a few kilometers from his home was the same bridge under which the fishermen stumbled upon the mutilated body. Curtis himself was not found at home, but the law enforcement officers spoke with his grandmother. The woman told about her grandson, and among other things, mentioned that he knew the area well and often visited the bridge in question. Curtis had loved to fish there since he was a kid, and the elderly woman had taken him with her more than once. So it turned out that the boy had a much closer connection with the crime scene than the police could have assumed before talking to his grandmother. The next day, the detectives managed to meet with Curtis himself. The young man was detained and taken to the sheriff's office in Ware. The interrogation lasted more than 8 hours, but the suspect essentially did not say anything, although he agreed to take a polygraph test. But even this did not become the main find of the investigators. Curtis's most valuable confession concerned his possession of a rather rare type of firearm, a Mossberg shotgun, a special feature of which is a magazine for 9 rounds. Thus, the detectives suggested that they had stumbled upon the owner of the likely murder weapon, as Heather had been shot with that very type of gun when the weapon was seized, and a ballistic examination was assigned. Experts officially confirmed that the schoolgirl had been shot with Curtis's shotgun. After being presented with evidence of his involvement in the murder of the young cheerleader, the boy gave in. He told the police that he had dragged 2 of his friends, Randy and Josh, into this crime, after which he wrote a detailed 2-page confession. 3 weeks after Heather's death, law enforcement finally had a suspect who had confessed to the crime. Given the likely complicity of the other young men, Randy and Josh were also arrested and brought to the station. The schoolboys were shown Curtis's testimony, where he claimed that he himself had initiated the massacre of the girl. But Randy had become the direct perpetrator. According to the confessor, he had given his shotgun to his friend and ordered him to shoot the innocent victim, while Josh had simply been present. However, the police were skeptical about this testimony, since the football team captain did not fit the image of a typical criminal. In the past, the young man had never had any problems with the law, had been an exemplary student and a successful athlete, popular among his peers. No one had ever spoken badly of him. Considering the geography of the events, the party took place in southern Oklahoma, and the body was found in Texas. The boys faced trial in this particular state, where the death penalty is prescribed for murder. This became a key problem for the investigation, as under local laws, the actual perpetrator could end up in the dock. Therefore, none of the suspects wanted to take the blame for the fatal shot. Only after persistent attempts by the police and a second meeting with the investigators did Randy finally begin to testify. However, he categorically denied his direct participation in the murder, claiming that Curtis had been the shooter and the initiator of the massacre of Heather, and Josh had simply helped him. For his part, Josh refused to cooperate with law enforcement. Thus, in October 1996, the detectives received 2 confessions that contradicted each other in many aspects. In the end, the investigators concluded that Randy's testimony seemed more truthful, and he had also successfully passed a lie detector test. It became clear that it would hardly be possible to establish the exact sequence of events on the fateful evening of October 2nd with 100% certainty. But it was decided to rely on the information provided by the football team captain. According to Randy's confessions, that day, Randy had planned to drink with his friends Curtis and Josh when they gathered. It turned out that Heather was supposed to join them. The girl knew Josh and Randy himself well, but had never met Curtis before, so she had no idea how dangerous a guy he was. When all four of them got together and had a good drink, Heather, like the rest of the company, found herself on the verge of losing consciousness. It was at this moment that Curtis, drunk, got the idea to take advantage of the girl's helpless state and abuse her. He immediately proceeded to act. As Randy recounted, Heather woke up from the harassment and screamed, pushing the attacker away, and then fainted again. Despite the fact that she could barely move her tongue, Curtis got scared because even a half-drunk victim could remember everything when she sobered up. He knew very well that such acts are met with an unfriendly reception in prison, and he did not want to end up behind bars because of this incident. Therefore, he suggested simply getting rid of the girl. The younger boys initially took these words as a bad joke, but Curtis was not joking. He really took a shotgun out of the trunk of his car and pointed it at the three teenagers. Randy and Josh realized that they were dealing with an extremely unpredictable guy, so they decided not to argue. They loaded the helpless schoolgirl into the trunk of Josh's car, and the whole company headed towards Curtis's house. But a few kilometers from the destination, the older boy ordered them to turn to the bridge where the victim's body was later found. Curtis forced his friends to stop in the middle of the bridge, get Heather out of the trunk, and put her by the railing. Fearing for their own lives, Randy and Josh obeyed. When the unconscious girl was pulled out of the car, she could not stand on her feet. The young men laid her on the ground and sat down in the car, not imagining what would happen next. Curtis walked right up to the helpless Heather and began to shoot her. Randy saw with his own eyes how a huge hole formed in his classmate's skull. He could not stand the gruesome sight, covered his face with his hands, and was afraid to even look in that direction. The attacker emptied the entire magazine of the shotgun into the victim, after which he and Josh threw the girl's mutilated body off the bridge. Getting into the car, the boys fled the crime scene. They saw with their own eyes what Curtis had done to Heather, so fear for their own lives made them keep silent. They loaded the helpless schoolgirl into the trunk of Josh's car, and the whole company headed towards Curtis's house. But a few kilometers from the destination, the older boy ordered them to turn to the bridge, where the victim's body was later found. Curtis forced his friends to stop in the middle of the bridge, get Heather out of the trunk, and put her by the railing. Fearing for their own lives, Randy and Josh obeyed. When the unconscious girl was pulled out of the car, she could not stand on her feet. The young men laid her on the ground and sat down in the car, not imagining what would happen next. Curtis walked right up to the helpless Heather and began to shoot her. Randy saw with his own eyes how a huge hole formed in his classmate's skull. He could not stand the gruesome sight, covered his face with his hands, and was afraid to even look in that direction. The attacker emptied the entire magazine of the shotgun into the victim, after which he and Josh threw the girl's mutilated body off the bridge. Getting into the car, the boys fled the crime scene. They saw with their own eyes what Curtis had done to Heather, so fear for their own lives made them keep silent. In October 1996, the three young men were officially charged with the abduction and murder of 16-year-old Heather Rich. The investigators had the hardest time working with Josh Bagwell, who refused to testify, and against whom, in fact, there was no direct evidence of involvement. The prosecution had to rely solely on the words of the other two defendants in the case, which contradicted each other. Due to the lack of physical evidence, the evidence base was not very reliable. To remedy this situation, the prosecutor offered Randy Wood a deal with the investigation. In exchange for testimony against Josh, the young man was promised life imprisonment with the right to parole after 30 years. Randy immediately agreed. The prosecutor's office also discussed with Heather's parents the possibility of a similar sentence for Curtis. In the opinion of the victim's family, the most important thing was to get truthful testimony from him and not to send the underage organizer of the murder to the death penalty. The Rich family, first and foremost, wanted to know the truth. On October 15th, Curtis accepted the prosecution's offer and pleaded guilty in exchange for life imprisonment without the right to early release. At the same time, during the trial, he continued to behave defiantly and inadequately. While in custody, awaiting trial, Curtis once attacked a guard, knocked him down, and began to strangle him. The enraged prisoner was subdued only by the joint efforts of several police officers. In February 1998, almost a year and a half after Heather's tragic death, the trial of Josh Bagwell began. The case had gained such notoriety that there were so many people eager to attend the hearing. In the end, access to the courtroom was restricted, with both random spectators and members of the press barred from being present. The defenders of the accused resorted to various attempts to justify their clients. In fact, the lawyers tried to tarnish the reputation of Heather herself, portraying her as an alcoholic and a loose woman who had allegedly entered into an intimate relationship with Curtis herself, and then began to threaten him with exposure. Forcing the boy to resort to drastic measures, the parents had to defend the honor and dignity of their daughter. In reality, the girl was a diligent student, a talented athlete, and an extremely decent person who simply found herself in the wrong company and encountered a real criminal. The floor was given to Curtis. To the surprise of those present, he suddenly returned to his initial version of events, claiming that Josh had not participated in the crime at all and had not even been aware of the murder plans. Instead, according to Curtis, it was Randy who had fired the fatal shot. This testimony deeply affected Randy. Unexpectedly for everyone, the football team captain took a desperate step. He refused the plea bargain. The young man did not want his confession to be regarded as dictated solely by the desire to save his own skin. Accusing his accomplices right in the courtroom, Randy stated that he primarily wanted to achieve justice for the innocently murdered girl. This decision went against even the advice of the defendant's lawyer. Despite all the nobility of this act, Randy consciously risked ending up on death row. It was this selfless behavior of the young man that made a strong impression on Heather's parents. The couple even personally met with Randy after the court session. Such a bold and principled step was of great importance to the family of the deceased. On February 10th, Wood appeared before the jury and told the whole truth about the terrible events of that fateful evening. His testimony left no doubt. The young man described in detail the full participation of Josh and Curtis in the murder of Heather, as well as Bagwell's role in concealing the traces of the crime. On February 14th, Curtis Gamble was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and the intentional commission of this particularly serious crime. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with an additional term of 99 years. In May 1998, a meeting took place between Heather's parents and Randy as part of a live television talk show. Despite all the pain and sorrow of losing their daughter, the rich couple expressed sincere admiration for the honesty and deep remorse of this young man. On August 7, 1998, the trial of Randy Wood was concluded. He was also found guilty of involvement in the murder. The young man was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 40 years. This decision saddened many people because Wood was the only one of the 3 defendants in the case who sincerely repented of what he had done and, risking his own life, decided to bring the truth to the jury. The prevailing opinion in society was that the boy did not deserve such a severe punishment. Josh Bagwell also suffered the fate of life imprisonment without the right to early release. He was sent to serve his sentence in the same correctional facility as Curtis. In January 2002, both convicts made a daring escape attempt, taking advantage of the night. They managed to hide in the state of Texas for 10 days. A nationwide search was announced. Eventually, the fugitives were caught and returned behind bars to continue serving their life sentences. Adolescence is an extremely difficult and exciting period in every person's life. It is quite likely that it is the behavior and decisions of parents at such moments that can determine what the future of their children will be. Until we meet again,